We're going to go back to the back side of the camera. There's a little tiny light down there. When you take a picture, the light comes on, tells you that the camera is writing information to the memory card. The most important thing to know at this point is don't take the memory card out of the camera while that light is on. It's kind of like the old darkroom light. They're in there working, don't disturb them. So that's why it's there. There's an infrared receiver. So if you want to get the little ML-L3, which costs about 15 to 20 bucks, you can fire the camera from the backside without touching the camera. So landscape photographers or people working on tripods, this would be a good tool for not vibrating or touching the camera. Little speaker back there. If you are playing a movie back, you can hear, not real loudly, but you can hear a little bit of what you have just recorded. The info button we've seen before. Anytime you want to get some more information, if you just hit that button at any time, let me go ahead and hit it on this camera here right now. They've put a new screen on the back of this camera, and it's actually a very nice display. They've changed the fonts, and it's all very easy to read. It's a different type of technology that they're using. But if you're working on a tripod and you can't see the top of the camera because it's up too high, this is a real easy way to see the exact changes that you're making on the camera. Let me throw it in a manual mode here, turn it on the info, and you can see your apertures, your shutter speed, including your light meter working. Let's even that light meter out there, as well as many of the other features on your camera. And so we'll be using that from time to time with other things as we go forward. Okay, if you are a very observant person, you've probably noticed that there's a couple of green dots on your camera. If you press the plus minus exposure compensation and the ISO button simultaneously for 2 seconds, and then again, you'll reset all the camera settings back to the factory default settings. So you probably don't want to do this, but if somebody's been messing with your camera, that's the fastest, easy way to get it back. And if you press the metering button and the garbage can button for 2 seconds, wait a second, and then press them again for 2 seconds, it reformats the memory card. And you want to know about that because that will delete all your pictures. So it's a quick way of deleting and formatting your cards. It's something that Nikon's been doing since the first of their digital cameras. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a thing, and I'm telling you about it. So be advised. Okay, next up, we're over on the left-hand side of the camera. The top button up here is a triple mode button. Does 3 different things. Number 1, it pops the flash up and turns it on. Number 2, it changes the flash mode. And number 3, it does something called exposure compensation. We'll talk about all of these. Okay, first off, flash has a limited distance. If you don't know much about the technicalities of flash, let me just say it falls off pretty darn quickly. It's going to illuminate subjects in front of you, and things that are really far away, it doesn't have any noticeable impact on. In general, think about 10 feet, 3 meters in front of you is how good it is. And much beyond that, it has difficulty reaching. The best use of the built-in flash, in my opinion, is for a little bit of what's called fill flash, which means just filling in the shadows for people that are nearby. And so you can see just a little bit more light is getting into those eye sockets and up in those shadowy areas of the face. Out in bright sunlight may not seem like the obvious time to use flash, but that's when you have really harsh shadows, and the flash can really fill in those shadows. And so it's not the greatest light in the world, but it is the light that is right on the camera. It's easily available, and all you need to do is just press the button and pop the flash up. Works very, very simply in that regard. Now, there is a number of different flash modes that you can put the camera in, and you're going to see all these different symbols here and words illustrating what mode the camera is in. And they're pretty obvious for the most part. If you see the lightning bolt, the flash is going to fire, or the flash is not going to fire if it's got the no flash symbol on it. Slow indicates that you're going to use a slow shutter speed, which can be both good and bad. It will allow in ambient light from maybe behind your subject. So if your subject is standing in front of say a cityscape at night, you'll have a slower shutter speed so that you can see the lights of the buildings. And the flash will illuminate the subject in front, which can be very good for maybe party, indoor scenes, or outdoor portraits. Red eye reduction reduces red eye, and while I do not like red eye, Trust me, I don't like red eye. I dislike red eye reduction even more than I hate red eye. And the problem with red eye reduction is that the camera has a light on the front of it that illuminates for about 1.5 seconds. And if you ever shoot pictures of kids who have lots of red eye, when you shine a bright light at a kid for 1.5 seconds, they get bored and they turn away. And so by the time you take a picture, they're turning someplace else. And I don't like that delay. I would rather have red eye and fix it later, which is very easy to fix later. And so I like turning off red eye reduction. Rear curtain sync is kind of a little technical thing where the flash matches up not with the front curtain, but with the rear curtain in its synchronization. And there's some special effects modes that we don't have time to go into in this class, but can be kind of fun to play with. Now, the way you change these flash modes is pretty simple. First, press the button down to just turn the flash on, and then hold the button down and turn the dial in the back of the camera. And so you can get to all your different flash modes by doing that. Now, the slightly more complicated third feature of this is flash exposure compensation. And in this mode, you press down on the button and you turn the front dial, and it changes the power of the flash. Now, normally, when the flash fires, what happens is that the camera, the brain, the computer, figures out how much flash is necessary. And there's a technical setting that it goes to, and it does a good job technically. Aesthetically, it seems to overpower people shots in many cases. So here's an example of TTL flash. It stands for through the lens automated flash. This is what the camera thinks looks good. And from a technical standpoint, you can't argue with it, okay? But from an aesthetic standpoint, I would say it's a little too much flash. A lot of people want to back off the flash a little bit in power. It's better to underdo the flash, undercook it, than overcook it, okay? And so in this case, I prefer TTL -1. I don't see a lot of difference with TTL -2. It becomes even more noticeable in other situations. In this case, she's wearing a dark sweater and there's a dark background, and the camera is trying to compensate by over-brightening her face, which is clearly too bright here. And as we go down through TTL -1, 2, and 3, skin tones, to me, seem most appropriate around TTL -2. And so if you do a lot of people photography, you're going to want to tone down that flash a little bit. I would say if you left it at TTL -1, that might be a good starting point. It depends on the situation, it depends on your style, it depends on the skin tones of the people that you're shooting. It's going to have a lot of variables. But this is one, if you do a lot of people photography and you want to use the built-in flash, which I don't recommend for many things, but it's there and it can be quite handy. Play around with the exposure compensation. And you don't want to go to the plus side, you want to stay on the minus side. I don't know that I've ever set my camera to TTL plus anything. It's just very, very rare. Some other just general information about flash. The top shutter speed is 1/250th of a second. Don't be concerned, you're not going to make a mistake here. You cannot set anything faster when the flash is popped up, or if you even have an additional flash added onto the hot shoe on the camera. But that is the limitation of what you can use with flash. And be reminded once again, you're good to about 3 meters or 10 feet. Yes, you can technically get much beyond this if you set your camera to a high ISO, and perhaps if you have a very fast lens, you might be able to get it out to 40 or 50 feet. But in general, it's not going to be very effective much beyond 10, 12 feet or so.
Stephen from Ballard asks, can you briefly talk about the CLS commander mode? Is the range for the onboard flash similar to those of speedlight units like SB910/SB900, etc.?
Okay. So for everyone else, he's jumping ahead.
Okay.
And he's getting very excited about the Nikon Creative Lighting System. And what it is it's where, let me pop our flash here, this flash will trigger other Nikon flashes to fire. And it does so the way old Navy ships communicated, by flashing lights at each other. And so it has to see this light in order to understand when and how much to fire. And so if you had an umbrella stand and an umbrella between it, it may or may not see it depending on other walls that it's bouncing off of. And so the distance really varies according to the obstacles and the darkness of the environment. It's possible that if you're out on a football field in the middle of the night, it'll be 100 yards and the remote flash will see it firing. You could have it right next to it and it wouldn't see it. It depends on a number of variables. And so it's a fun little system. I'm going to talk more about this when we get into the menu settings, because you have to set this camera up in the menu to be a master slave, and it's triggering other slaves. And in general, it's kind of a cool mode to play around with. For those who have gotten pretty serious about their flash photography, most people are not satisfied with it because it's line of sight. And umbrellas, soft boxes, and things like that can block it. And so most people tend not to want to do that, and they'll use a radio trigger. The other problem with having this flash in some cases is that it'll reflect on your subject, or this will be part of the illumination of your subject, which they don't want. And so it's for some people, not for everyone. We will talk more about it. We'll just jump real quickly and just talk about built-in flashes versus add-on flashes. So the built-in flash, you'll hear a lot of serious photographers complain and whine, it's a terrible flash, it's not so good, what's wrong with it? Well, if you had to pick the worst spot in the world to put a flash, it wouldn't be far from where this is right now. It might be on the bottom version of the camera, but having it really close to the lens, having it really small in size is a terrible place to have a flash, because you end up with these very distinct shadows that you can see here in this example. By adding on a flash, you can get the flash higher up to knock those shadows into a different direction that you may not see shooting a vertical image like this. Then, as the last question just was about off-camera flash, here is an example of using the built-in flash to fire an off-camera flash, where you can get much more interesting, softer, better directional lighting. And so if you do want to get better lighting, that the person sending in the question has the right idea. Get the flash off of the camera if you want to get really good lighting. The built-in flash, it's an emergency. It's like the spare tire on your car. You know those small spare tires that you get now on cars? You don't want to use that as your sole source of getting around. And so if you do a lot of flash photography, you want to bump up and get something better. So let me address the Nikon optional flashes. The SB400 is their small flash, and it's not going to be much different than what you have built into your camera. So I can't say that I highly recommend it. The SB-R200 triggers remote flashes, but your camera will already do it, so I can't recommend this flash either. They're both going to work fine. It's just, I don't think they're worth the money. The SB700 is probably the go-to flash on this camera. It's their intermediate level flash. It's going to offer a lot more power than the built-in flash. It's got the bounce capability, so you can bounce it off of low white ceilings as well as walls. And it's got some other nice little features to it that make it a good, worthwhile flash. Now the SB700 is going to sell for a little over $300, but as I said before at the beginning of class, I think the Nikons are worth a little bit extra money compared to some no-name third market brand flash. I would highly recommend this flash. If you are very serious about your flash work, if you need more power, if you need special effects, the SB910 is their top-of-the-line flash. And that one's going to sell for close to $550, maybe even as much as $600. And both the 700 and the 910 use 4 AA batteries. The 910 is going to be, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe 40%, 50% more powerful. And it's going to give you a number of special effects modes, multi-strobe, for instance. Not going to get into that right now, but it's quite helpful. If you were to do professional wedding photography or event photography, the 910 would be the way to go. For most family-type situations, the SB700 would be the way to go. With either one of those, what I would highly recommend is the SC28 TTL remote cord. This enables you to get the flash off the camera, still be 100% automatic. A lot of professionals will add a flash bracket so that they can keep the flash above the lens when they shoot vertical. But if you don't want to go to that extreme, that's fine. You can just use it as a handheld cord. And the cord is just long enough that it's about as long as the normal human can stretch their arms from their eye to out to their arms. And so it's a very handy cord for getting in unusual angles and works very well for macro photography as well as portrait photography. I don't know if we have any follow-up questions on flashes, but I'll just delay for a moment to see if there's any final things that we need to take care of regarding flash, because we're just about done.
Totally. We have a few questions coming in about the high-speed sync setting. Want to Buy One says, can he discuss high-speed sync flash, and how do you set the camera to take advantage of this? Mango7 asks, in the menu, custom setting menu, bracketing flash settings, has a choice for setting the sync speed to 1/320 fp and 1/250 fp. Doesn't that mean sync speed at 1/320?
Okay, so when I told you earlier that the top flash sync speed was 1/250th of a second, I was lying to you, okay? I was trying to keep things simple. I was going to tell you later on, but I'll tell you now. The camera technically can trigger at shutter speeds faster than 2/50th, but you need the correct flash. These Nikon flashes, 700, 910 will work. And you need to kind of put the camera in a special mode. And the camera fires a slightly different type of flash, and it's not TTL. It's a manual flash. It's not automated. You have to manually start adjusting the power of the flash and setting shutter speeds and apertures more critically, because things are going to be different. It's a little bit more complicated than we have time to get into. If we had a class specifically on the flashes, that is something that we would spend a great deal of time on. But it is something that you will generally do on the flash itself. And so you could set a shutter speed of 3/20th, for instance, but it's not of any real advantage. For those of you who are not super familiar with flashes, when a flash fires, it happens super, super quickly. Usually 1,000th of a second, or maybe even a 10,000th of a second. And so let's say you're shooting a model in a studio, or maybe outside, doesn't really matter. And you have your flash at 2/50th of a second, and you're worried about movement, because 2/50th, it's fast, but it's not that fast. The flash is going to be stopping most of the action. And so most people in studio situations are shooting at around 125th of a second, because that's where their lights sync up really well. And the flash is going to stop the action. And so for general photography with flash, 1/25th to 2/50th is going to be fine. It's only special effects that you're going to need those special manual faster settings.
Excellent. And then OP Photo asks, will the SB800 work as well with high-speed sync?
SB800, which was the predecessor, maybe 2 generations to the SB910, I believe it will, but I haven't tested it and confirmed. I think I used to own an SB800. And so I'm just trying to go off of my memory, which is a few years going back now in time. And I'm pretty sure it will, because it was the top of the line. That's been a feature they've had for quite a while.